everybody, my name is Bill Buckhalter, and this is another episode of Monster Making 101. This week I want to talk about a campaign I've been running for my home group for about a year and a half now, called Tomb of Annihilation. You may be familiar with it. It is a campaign published by Wizards of the Coast, and I've got the book right here. What I really like about this campaign is it has a lot of different themes and settings for your players to keep them interested and to keep them occupied. The campaign starts with some urban adventures in the port city of Nyanzaru. Then it becomes a rather large hex crawl through the jungles of Chult with lots of different points of interests and things for your players to discover while they crawl through the jungle. And eventually it ends as a classic dungeon crawl through both the Fane of the Night Serpent and through the Tomb of Annihilation itself. So there's a lot to offer your players, a lot to keep them interested and keep them on their toes. It has a lot of great traps and puzzles in the adventure, and most importantly, it has a lot of really great monsters in them. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is one of the monsters. Spoiler alert, if you're playing in this campaign right now, or you plan to play in it at some time, you should probably stop watching this video right now and instead go check out my first video where I walk you through how I built a monster called the Hellspawn Burrower. I'll put a link to that video in the description. For those of you who are still watching, you're probably DMing this campaign, and so I want to talk about one of the key monsters in the third chapter of the book called the Dwellers of the Forbidden City. And that monster would be the one that is prominently featured at the beginning of the chapter, the King of Feathers. So this is a monster, when I first started reading through the adventure, I was really excited about using this special T-Rex that they had created. But as I started to read over it more and more, I got a little disappointed with how they created that creature and decided that I wanted to do something different with it. I want to start by saying that if you're running the adventure, or if you have run the adventure and you used the King of Feathers the way it's written in the book, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If you enjoyed it and if your players had a great time with it, fantastic, that's awesome. But for me personally, I was looking for something that had a little bit different theme to it. Let's dive in and kind of examine what I felt wasn't good about this monster and how I felt it could be improved. All right, so here is a snapshot of what the King of Feathers looks like according to the campaign book. So as you can see here, the King of Feathers is just a regular Tyrannosaurus Rex. In other words, it's a challenge rating 8 creature. So the designers, in order to make the King of Feathers a bit more of a challenge, added some hit points. As it says in the Tomb of Annihilation book, the King of Feathers has 200 hit points. They also give it the ability to see invisible creatures and objects as if they were visible. I think they wanted to go with the idea that the King of Feathers was somehow innately magical. No real explanation for that, for why. The next thing they did is what really was a head scratcher for me, saying that it could innately cast Misty Step. And this is where I'm going to get a little opinionated. Giving a creature like a Tyrannosaurus Rex the ability to Misty Step, basically teleport itself, just seemed a little out of place. If I was playing in a game and the dungeon master suddenly took his T-Rex and teleported it, I would kind of wonder where that was coming from. It's not something I would expect. Maybe to give an example, if I was fighting a bunch of orcs and my wizard, my ranger were in the back and they were hitting these orcs from a distance and really beating up on them, and all of a sudden the orcs just teleported into the back and started beating on the ranged characters. As a player, I'd probably give my DM a bit of a side eye, like, really? That's what these orcs can do? They can teleport? It almost feels like it's something that the DM pulled out of his hip pocket at the last minute just to keep his monster from getting beat up on too badly. That's not to say it's wrong. That's not to say it's bad. It just didn't feel natural to me. And when I run monsters, I like them to feel natural. I like my players to feel like when they run into something, they can sort of expect what this creature is going to do. I mean, that's not to say that it's a bad thing to pull a trick that they're not expecting, but not something completely out of left field like that. But then this Summon Swarm ability, where basically the King of Feathers exhales a swarm of insects onto the players, and then this becomes a swarm that runs around, and the players now have to deal with that as well as the T-Rex. Again, I sort of see the idea here. I sort of see the concept. A lot of times a solo monster all by itself will often get beat up pretty badly by a group of players when it doesn't have some support. And this is a good opportunity to talk about something in D&D called action economy. When you have a single creature fighting against an entire group of players, especially something at a challenge rating 8 here, where the players are probably going to have multiple attacks and multiple actions that they can do on their turn. So you have 5 or 6 players in your group, each one making multiple attacks. So they're taking as many as 10 to 12 actions every round, whereas your creature is probably only getting to make 2, maybe 3 actions at most. So the player's action economy, they get lots more actions than the monster does, and it makes the fight more easy for the players. So by giving the King of Feathers this ability to exhale up a swarm of insects, you've now added another creature to the fight. That's more actions. You start to balance the action economy a little bit. But like the Misty Step, it just feels like it's coming from out of left field. I wouldn't expect a T-Rex to exhale a swarm of bees or a swarm of insects. And then the second thing that really bothered me about this ability was the fact that if you read earlier in the adventure, during the jungle crawl, the players have an opportunity to run into a zombie T-Rex, an undead T-Rex out in the middle of the jungle. And one of the abilities that the undead T-Rex had was the ability to basically vomit up zombies. This just felt like a rehash of that ability. It actually didn't feel unique or new at all. If I was a player in this game, I'd think to myself, does every T-Rex on this peninsula puke something up on me? First, I've got zombie T-Rexes puking up more zombies. Now I got the King of Feathers puking up bees. I don't know. For me personally, it just didn't feel very unique. It didn't feel very creative. It almost felt kind of rehashed. So it was another ability that I really felt like I wanted to get rid of. So what did I want to do with this creature? Well, I knew that I wanted the King of Feathers to be a very formidable opponent. I really wanted it to be kind of the pinnacle of the jungle crawl, because at this point in the adventure, if you're familiar with it, this is kind of the end of the outdoor portion of the adventure, the jungle crawl portion of the adventure. Very soon after this fight, your players are likely going to enter the Tomb of Annihilation, and now they're going to start a really long dungeon crawl. They're going to be indoors. I saw the King of Feathers as being the alpha predator of the jungles of Chult. There are no other creatures in the jungle that compare to this T-Rex. But I also wanted it to feel like a real, true creature. Not something magical, not something with weird abilities, just a real alpha predator that these players are going to have to deal with. So let's dive in and see exactly how I rebuilt the King of Feathers. So the first thing I want to do is introduce you to a website that I use rather frequently called the Kobold Fight Club. Aside from having a really awesome name for this website, it has a really awesome tool as well that as a DM you can use to really easily make sure that you're building an encounter that is challenging enough for your players, but not too challenging. When you go to the Kobold Fight Club, the first thing you're going to do is go up here to where it says Group Info, and you're going to tell it how many players you have and what level those players are. For this particular creature, when I was rebuilding the King of Feathers, I knew that I have 6 players in my group, and I figured they would be about level 8 by the time they actually ran into the King of Feathers. The T-Rex that we looked at earlier is a CR8 creature. So what I've done here is I've set up a filter where the minimum CR is 8 and the maximum CR is 8. So that's basically going to filter out all of the CR8 creatures, okay? And when we go to the next page here, we find the T-Rex. If I add that into my encounter, so now I have one CR8 T-Rex creature at 3,900 experience, okay? Well, you say to yourself, okay, that should be somewhere between an easy and a medium encounter. Well, they have something called adjusted experience. And what they do is they say, well, yes, even though that T-Rex is worth 3,900 experience, because it's all alone, and this goes back to the action economy, right? Because it's just one T-Rex, and it has so fewer actions than my group of 6 players, they adjust the experience down, and it's really only worth about 1,950 experience, just under 2,000 experience. So really, difficulty-wise, this is less than an easy encounter. One T-Rex would just get absolutely owned by a group of 6th, 8th level players. If I add 2 T-Rexes, okay, now it becomes a medium encounter, okay? Because, again, adjusted experience-wise, now the action economy is a little more equal. There's 2 T-Rexes, there's more actions. Now we're starting to see a more fair fight. I add in a 3rd T-Rex, now we're deadly, right? We've got a ton of experience here. We've got a lot of actions with 3 T-Rexes. That's an encounter that would probably kill our players. To give us a baseline, we're going to have to build something that is more difficult than the original CR8 T-Rex if we truly want to give our players a challenge, okay? So what I usually do in these cases is I'll go, set my max so that I can get some higher CR creatures in here, and I'll just go and find a CR that actually makes a hard encounter. So, let's see. What if we went with an adult red dragon? That's a CR17 creature. That's a hard encounter. So an adult red dragon for 6th, 8th level players, that's a hard encounter. That's what I want here. I want the King of Feathers to be a hard encounter. So we're going to design a King of Feathers T-Rex that is in the neighborhood of a CR17 creature for our players to fight. So let's open up our monster builder and get to work. Okay, so if you watched my last video, you're familiar with this program. It's the D&D Monster Maker. It's available at thegeniusinc.com. I will put a link to that down in the description for those who are just watching for the first time. But this is a program that I use to build monsters from scratch, and it's a phenomenal tool. It's a great tool. I highly recommend you download and use it, and maybe throw a buck or two to the developers. Okay, so let's get started building our creature. First off, of course, the monster's name is going to be the King of Feathers. All right, and gender-wise, we'll just leave that neutral. That doesn't really matter. For size, I want our creature to be gargantuan. Now, this is a size that you might not be too familiar with in 5th edition. It's not something you run across a whole lot. But gargantuan is basically anything larger than huge. That can mean 4x4, it can mean 5x5. Obviously, huge is 3x3. Type is just a plain old beast. After all, we're just making a T-Rex here. We're not making anything magic or magical like that, so it's just a beast. There's no tag for dinosaurs. We'll leave the alignment unaligned, and just like last time, we'll skip over the armor class and hit points and come straight down to challenge rating. As we worked this up in the Kobold Fight Club, we learned that for a group of 6 level 8 players, you're going to need something that's going to be a challenge rating 17. Next, we'll go up to our ability scores. Our strength, we're going to want this creature to be fairly strong. Obviously, that's going to be its main attacks are all going to be based off of strength. So I'm going to give it a strength of 22. Dexterity-wise, I wouldn't expect it to be very dexterous at all, so we're just going to make that a dexterity of 12. Constitution, I would expect it to be very tough and have a truckload of hit points. We're going to give it a constitution of 20. Intelligence, I wouldn't expect it to be overly intelligent. It's a creature that just operates on instinct. We're only going to make that an 8. Wisdom, again, we're just leaving that at 10. And charisma, I'm going to make that a 12. And you'll see here in a minute why, because I want to give this creature a bit of an intimidation factor. And intimidation is based on charisma. So I want it to have at least a little bit of charisma. So now that we've done all of our ability scores and picked our challenge rating, we can come back up and work on our hit points. Now, if you recall my last video, I said that I like to use the hit dice at about twice of the challenge rating. But in this case, that's just not practical. If I made my hit dice twice my challenge rating, I'd have 34 hit dice, and this thing would just have way, way too many hit points. So instead, we're going to go to our statistics by challenge rating table that we used before, and we're going to use that to kind of tell us where we should be, what neighborhood we should be in. So for a challenge rating 17 creature, we would expect that we would have somewhere in the neighborhood of 311 to 325 hit points. So going back to our builder, how do we get to that number? Well, we know that a gargantuan creature actually uses a d20 for its hit dice. What happens if we put 17 of those in? Generate our hit points. That's not quite enough. That only gives us 263. Let's bump that up to, let's bump that up to 20. Oh, there we go. With 20 hit dice, we end up with 310 hit points. That's right about where we're supposed to be according to the table. So we'll leave it there. Also, according to the table, if we look, it says that a challenge rating 17 creature should have a 19 armor class. And it looks like that's what the builder gave us. So we're right in the neighborhood. We're looking good there. As far as speed goes, this is a gargantuan creature that takes enormous strides. So it covers ground a lot faster than just 30 feet in a movement. So we're going to bump that speed up to 50 feet. So I want the King of Feathers to have saving throws because it's a tougher than normal creature. So we'll start by giving it a strength saving throw, and that will be based on its proficiency and its strength modifier. So the strength saving throw bonus will be 12. I also want to give it a constitution saving throw because, again, it's tougher than a normal creature. So that's the constitution modifier, which is 5 plus 6. So it's got a con save of plus 11. And then I want to give it a charisma save because, again, this is an intimidating, frightening creature. So that will be its charisma and its proficiency. So that's 1 plus 6. It's going to have a charisma saving throw of 7. So we'll come over here to senses. Obviously, it's going to see in the dark. It's going to have dark vision, 60 feet. It's not going to speak any languages, so we'll leave that blank. It is going to have some skills. I'm going to give it athletics. That's based on strength, because if this creature has to do anything like escape a grapple or break out of restraints or anything, it's going to have a good chance of doing that. The way that you give it a skill is that you have 3 options here. You usually want to leave add stat checked because what that's going to do is add in the stat bonus, which is 6. You also want to leave add proficiency checked because whenever something is trained in a skill, it gets its proficiency bonus. The middle one says add bonus. If you want it to be overly skilled at this particular thing, you can leave that checked and put in any extra that you want to put in. In this case, I don't want to do that. I want it to be a straight up skill based on its statistic and based on its proficiency. So we'll add that skill hitting this button over here, and you notice that it puts it up there. So it now has an athletics of plus 12, okay? And I noticed that I forgot to add my dark vision, so we'll push that button there, and that puts my dark vision up there as well. We also want this creature to be fairly perceptive. It sees what's going on in an environment. It knows what's going on. It's hard to sneak up on it. So we're going to give it a perception. And then last but not least, I want to give it intimidation. For damage modification, I don't see where the King of Feathers would resist any kind of damage, but it is going to be immune to a condition. I'm going to put Frightened in here. I'm going to pull it down and select Frightened and give it immunity. There is nothing in the whole jungle that can frighten this creature. It is the apex predator of the jungle. So now that we've done all of that, we can hit our preview button, give it a second here to generate, and we've got the start of our King of Feathers right there. So now we will add some abilities. I am going to stick with one of the abilities that they originally gave the King of Feathers, which is something called Legendary Resistance. If you're familiar with legendary creatures, they often get additional actions that they can take in between the player's turns. And this helps again with that action economy that we talked about earlier. And we'll get more into that here in a minute. But if you have a legendary creature, it usually gets this legendary resistance, which is its ability to basically succeed on a saving throw when it would otherwise fail. Next, I'm going to add in another ability that I want to give this creature, and I'm going to call it Massive Size. So this Massive Size ability, I'm going to word it to say that the King of Feathers cannot be pushed or knocked prone by any creature that isn't huge or larger. And it has advantage on saves and ability checks against being grappled or restrained. This thing is just too big to hold down, too big to knock down, too big to push. So now we can start to get into the meat and potatoes. We can get into the actual attacks for this creature. Obviously, the first attack this creature is going to have is the ability to bite. So we'll give it a bite attack. This will be obviously a melee weapon attack. It will use its strength. So it's going to get a plus 12 to hit. The target is going to be one creature. We're going to use 3d10. Okay? D10s are a pretty big damage dice, and 3 of them is pretty par for the course for a monster this large. And obviously, a bite attack will be piercing. Now, I'm going to give it a special ability. So I've added in some additional ability here that happens on a hit. And when we do a quick preview, you'll see how that works out. But before we do that, I want to edit the reach of this bite attack because, again, gargantuan creature, it can reach down and bite things that are pretty far away. So we're going to give it a reach of 10 with this bite attack. So it has a bite attack, plus 12 to hit, a reach of 10. On a hit, it's going to do 3d10 plus 6 piercing damage. And if the target is large or smaller, it is grappled. The escape DC is 17. So basically when it bites you, now it's got you in its jaws, right? While grappled, the target is restrained, and the King of Feathers cannot make another bite attack. The key to making something restrained when you grapple it is that a creature which is grappled is still able to do most of its normal actions. It can attack and it can do things as normal, and there's no penalty to that. But if you specify that somebody who is grappled is also restrained, now they're going to be at a disadvantage whenever they try to attack back. So in this case, by saying it's restrained, it really is a disadvantage to the player who gets bitten. So the next attack we're going to give the King of Feathers is a tail sweep. As a DM, think in your mind, how is this fight going to go? I totally see the King of Feathers kind of in the middle of this fight. PCs are surrounding it from all sides, attacking from every which direction. And the King of Feathers is just kind of whipping around. He's got this big, long tail behind him that just kind of whips around and is hitting everything behind him while in front of him he's biting down on people. So the tail sweep attack is going to be a little different than a normal attack. We're going to put it, instead of in the weapon attack tab, we're going to put it in the action tab. And we're going to say that the King of Feathers sweeps his tail in a 15-foot cone. So this isn't an attack that actually targets one creature. That tail sweeps and it's going to hit everybody in an area, okay? So all creatures in the area must succeed on a DC 17 dexterity saving throw or take 3d8 plus 6 bludgeoning damage and be knocked prone. If they succeed on their dex save, then they take half the damage and they're not knocked prone. That's a pretty typical mechanic for 5th edition, to take half damage on a save. And then the last thing that I see the T-Rex doing is actually stomping on creatures. We're going to give it one last attack, and obviously we're going to call this Stomp. Again, we're back on our weapon attack tab, not our action tab. So it's going to be a melee weapon attack. It's going to use strength for this attack. The target is going to be one creature. But I want to specify that it only stomps on prone creatures. So you can actually go into the target and you can edit this. Even though it's a pull down, you can type whatever you want in here. So we're going to say one prone creature. Again, as a DM, you got to ask yourself, how do I see this creature working? Well, I see that the King of Feathers would take and do a big tail sweep, and then after he actually knocks somebody prone with his tail, then he stomps on them. The damage for the stomp attack, I think, is going to, again, be 3d10 plus 6, and it's going to be bludgeoning damage. And that's it. Nothing else special on that. Again, we're going to give it a reach of 10 because he's a gargantuan creature and he takes big steps. We are not done yet. The King of Feathers still has more tricks up his sleeve. I'm going to give him an action that a lot of huge and gargantuan creatures have. It's a very popular action for creatures this big. It's the ability to swallow something that the creature has bitten. And I'm going to show you the way we're going to do this with a special feature of the Monster Builder. So you notice that there's a button here that says Add SRD Content. If we push that, it will pop up a window here where we can go and search for any creature that's part of the SRD and add as many abilities from that creature as we like. So another creature which is very much like this, that has the ability to swallow anything that it has bitten, is the Tarrasque. Of course, everybody's familiar with the Tarrasque. One of the largest, most monstrous creatures in Dungeons and Dragons. So I'm going to select the Tarrasque from the drop down here, and I'm going to go here to the Actions tab. And one of the actions that the Tarrasque has is Swallow. So I'm going to select that action, and you notice that immediately it starts to edit the action for our creature. Instead of saying the Tarrasque, it says the King of Feathers, okay? And so I can go up here, I have two options. Add all from creature. If I push that button, it's going to put everything the Tarrasque can do into our creature. We don't want that. We just want to push Add Selected. That just adds the ability that we've selected, in this case, Swallow, okay? So we're going to add that, and you'll notice that now Swallow is added here on our creature. And if we do a preview, we now have the Swallow ability. I've edited the ability up a little bit to be more in line with the creature we're creating as opposed to the Tarrasque, but you can see now how it reads. The King of Feathers makes a bite attack against a large or smaller creature that it's grappling. If the attack hits, the target takes the bite's damage and the target is swallowed. The grapple ends. While swallowed, the creature is blinded and restrained. It has total cover against attacks and other effects from outside the King of Feathers, and it takes 21 points of acid damage, 6d6 acid damage, at the start of each of the King of Feathers' turns. If the King of Feathers takes 30 damage or more on a single turn from a creature inside of it, It must succeed on a DC 20 Constitution saving throw at the end of the turn or regurgitate all swallowed creatures, which fall prone in a space within 10 feet. If the King of Feathers dies, a swallowed creature is no longer restrained and can escape by using 30 feet of movement. So we've added the swallow ability to the King of Feathers bag of tricks here. All of these abilities, you'll notice, even though we've given it a lot to do, none of this is anything that the players would think is out of the realm of possibility for a T-Rex and a creature this size. Notice we haven't given it anything crazy like the ability to teleport. It's not exhaling big clouds of insects. It's doing all the things that we would expect a T-Rex to do. So the next thing we're going to do here is give the King of Feathers multi-attack, because again, that helps with the action economy that we spoke about earlier. So we will push the Add Action button, go to the multi-attack tab, and we'll say the King of Feathers makes 2 attacks, but I'm going to restrict this just a little and say that the King of Feathers makes 2 attacks, but it may not make the same attack twice in the same turn. So the last thing I want to do for the King of Feathers is give it legendary actions. And we talked about this earlier when we gave it the legendary resistance. A legendary creature has actions which it is allowed to take on other characters' turns. This, again, goes all the way back to the action economy, and it gives our creature more things to do, so it balances out the fact that it is fighting all alone against a larger group of characters. By giving legendary actions, we basically give our creature 3 more things it can do, and we spread those 3 things out over the course of an entire round. So on its turn, the King of Feathers is going to be making the 2 attacks that we gave it with the multi-attack, but then on other turns, it's going to be taking these legendary actions. So to do this, we push the button here that says Add Legendary, and a pop-up window comes up, and for legendary actions, we say the name is just King of Feathers, legendary actions, okay? Number of actions, that's how many times it can actually take a legendary action, okay? 3 is pretty much the standard. I don't know that I've really ever seen a creature in the monster manual or any other book that takes more or less than 3 legendary actions. So I usually just leave that alone. There's nothing that would stop you from giving it more or less, but I like to conform to the way most monsters are created. So the first legendary action that we're going to give the King of Feathers is Bite or Swallow. So basically, we're just going to say that the King of Feathers makes a bite attack, or if it's grappling a creature, it makes a swallow attack. So we press the Add Ability button, and that goes down into our list. The next legendary action we're going to give it is Tail Sweep. And as you would guess, the King of Feathers makes a Tail Sweep attack. We're going to add that ability. Then we're going to give it Stomp. The Stomp ability gives it the opportunity to make a Stomp attack. We'll add that. Now I'm going to give it a special ability that it can only do with a legendary action. And this is something that's pretty common. Usually there's something in the legendary actions that is unique for the creature. And in this case, I'm going to give it the ability to Roar. Now, another thing that is pretty common is sometimes more powerful legendary actions will actually take more than 1 action. So we're going to say that if the King of Feathers chooses to Roar, that's going to cost 2 of its 3 legendary actions. Okay, so the way this ability is going to read is that the King of Feathers lets out a terrifying roar. Each creature within 120 feet that can hear it must succeed on a DC 17 Wisdom saving throw or become frightened for 1 minute. If you're familiar with how 5e mechanics go, fear spells typically are wisdom saving throws, so that's why we've chosen that. While frightened by this ability, on its turn, a creature must take the dash action to move away from the King of Feathers. If there is nowhere to move, the creature may take the dodge action. Okay, obviously, you don't need players to be running off the map. If they get to the edge of the map, they can just dodge. A creature can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of its turns, ending the effect on itself on a success. If a creature's saving throw is successful, or if the effect ends for it, the creature is immune to the King of Feathers' roar for the next 24 hours. Again, that's a pretty standard 5e mechanic that once you save against something's fear, you're typically not afraid of it, again, for a while. All right, so we'll add that ability. So now that we're done here, we can close this box and do a preview again. And now we see that the King of Feathers has its legendary actions here at the bottom. So now that we're done actually building the creature, the last step we have to do is make sure that it is accurately built. We talked about this in the last video, that making sure a creature is accurately built, it means that we make sure that it matches the challenge rating that we thought we were building for. And again, that uses the table from the Dungeon Master's Guide called the Monster Statistics by Challenge Rating. So we'll start by looking at our defensive challenge rating. Well, this should be pretty straightforward because we built the creature off of this table. We know that our creature has 310 hit points and an armor class of 19. That's straight from the table. A creature with 310 hit points, armor class of 19 is right there in that cusp between a CR 16 and CR 17 creature. So we should be okay there. So now we have to look at our offensive challenge rating. And as we said before, the offensive challenge rating starts with the damage per round. And the damage per round should be an average of the damage that the creature can do over the course of 3 rounds. Now for the last creature we built, that was pretty straightforward because the Hellspawn Burrower we built did the same damage every round. But the King of Feathers is very different. The King of Feathers has a lot of different attacks, a lot of different abilities, and so its damage can vary from round to round. So let's take a look at that. The first thing I want to note is that I made a couple of quick changes before we got to this section. One of the things I did was I made the swallow ability a recharge. So the King of Feathers can't swallow creatures over and over again. It can only do that once unless it recharges. Maybe it's going to do it twice. So the second thing I did was down in the legendary actions, I took away the ability for it to swallow with a legendary action. It can only bite with its legendary actions. So now we'll take the average damage for those 3 rounds, and that comes out to about 125 points of damage per round. So going back to our table, 125 damage per round is actually about a CR 20 creature. Okay, so we're probably a little high there. A CR 20 creature would have an attack bonus of plus 10. And our creature actually has an attack bonus of plus 12. So we've got to bump up one more CR. That gets us to a CR 21 creature offensively. So CR 21 offensively, CR 17 defensively. That means we're somewhere probably in the neighborhood of more like a CR 19 creature. Probably need to dial something back a little bit. So when I look at this, I ask myself, where's a lot of this damage coming from? And really that tail swipe is doing a lot of damage. That's 19 points of damage to 2 creatures. And we're doing that probably twice per round because we're doing it on his turn and we're doing it again with his legendary action. So we have a couple of options. we could possibly take the damage out and just use the tail swipe to knock people prone for the stomp. The other option is we could take the tail swipe out of the legendary actions, and then he wouldn't be able to do that damage more than once per turn. Let's try both and see what happens. Okay, so I did a lot of math off camera because I didn't want to bore you with sitting here and watching me do math. To summarize, what I did was I ended up reducing the damage dives from D10s to D8s. So my bite went down to 3D8 as opposed to 3D10. Took my tail swipe down to 2D8. The stomp I reduced to 3D8 damage. Of course, the swallow is a recharge, so we assume that we're only going to do that once. And on our legendary actions, we left in the ability for it to tail swipe, but we took out the ability for it to swallow. So in doing all of that, I came up with 70 points of damage in the first round and then 108 points of damage in round 2 and 3. Came out to an average of about 95 points of damage per round. When we looked at our table, 95 points of damage per round is a CR 15 creature, which we would expect to have an attack bonus of +8. Our attack bonus is +12, so we had to bump up 2 levels. So in the end, that brought us right at the CR 17 offensive rating. With our CR 17 defensive rating, that makes us a well-built creature. We are right at the CR that we wanted to be. And so this is what our final creature ends up looking like once we've cleaned it up a little bit and done some formatting. Perhaps in a future video, I'll show you guys how I do that and how I clean these stat blocks up to look really nice. This is a finished version of my King of Feathers that I used for my game. And as you can see, with this version of the King of Feathers, I think it comes out being much more like a real T-Rex would be. There's no magic really involved here, nothing that the characters wouldn't expect this creature to do, but yet it still has a lot of versatility. There's a lot of things it's doing with the tail swipe, with stomping on people, biting and swallowing people, and then the legendary actions really help with the action economy and keep this creature doing things throughout the whole fight and not getting overwhelmed by a large group of fairly high-level players. So I think it ends up being a pretty good challenge. So if you like this idea, if you think maybe this sounds a little more interesting, I'd love to hear how you guys use this in your campaign. I know when I used it in mine, it worked great. So once again, thanks very much for tuning in. My name's Bill Buckhalter. You can find me on Facebook and YouTube as Buck Wiley DM. Please take some time, post in the comments, tell me how you like the video, and be sure to post pictures of monsters that you want to see created in a future video. Post a picture of a miniature or something that you've drawn. Tell me about the monster that you want to see made. What CR you'd like to see it made at. Maybe you're running a campaign and you need a CR3 creature or you need a CR8 creature. We'll build it the way you need it. So once again, thanks for watching and happy gaming.